So in this segment, I want to discuss Kemi Badenoch talking about, culture and values and all of this stuff, and then she talks about why she's against the death penalty. But this kind of talk around British values and culture, etc., like, it's such a tedious conversation because no one can really define it. So let's have a listen to what she has to say, because this is on the back of the more kind of news around the Stockport killer, the one who set off the riots.
One of the things that I don't think we have been doing in this country properly is having a proper immigration strategy. And many people assume that it's just something that government does. It has to go well beyond government. All of society has to do it. And that's what used to happen when we had immigration in much smaller, much more manageable numbers. And the numbers that we have seen over the last few decades mean that we are getting people having separate and insular communities. The most extreme example of this is what we saw with the rape gangs, where people who've been coming to this country from the 60s, from a particular region and sub-community in Pakistan, get here, stay insular, not interested in integration, and then you start seeing very, very toxic, I would say evil habits propagating, and no one doing anything about it because they're...
But this was, you're talking about a lack of integration and stuff. From what I've heard, that culture was more normal of girls, literally girls, minors, who were, hanging around with and being, essentially essayed by adults, grown men, well above, 18 and above, being in their cars, etc., hanging out with them in public places and things like that, and no one said anything about it. There was, I give this example a lot, there was literally an area in the town centre I live in, right, where you would see stuff like that happen, and it was out there, and it was normal, because no one called it out, because no one wanted to address it. So you talk about the lack of, quote, British values that the people who were involved in these gangs had, which is fair, right? But there was a culture of that in the UK which was seen as a normal, to the point where, the victims of that kind of town square area did come out and say, like, no one actually tried to help us. Like, the police, would walk past that and not say anything. And you would see people, you're talking about, dudes with beards, like stubble and things like that, hanging out with girls, like minors. And no one did anything. So, I'm more than happy to have a much broader conversation on this stuff. But you're talking about just integration here, which isn't really the answer. Because if this was so, if what these people were doing was so abhorrent and so kind of out of the norms of British culture at the time, people would have called it out, because it would have looked very, very inordinary. I guess, I don't know, very abnormal, which I don't think it was seen as that at the time. And it's not just because these people are foreign, it's because I don't think culturally British people really cared about this kind of thing where minors would hang out with grown men. And that's my opinion. I could be wrong about that period of time. I don't know. I was also a minor back then, so you guys in the comments will have to tell me about that. But from what I've heard and what other people have told me, that culture was normal, and that's a big problem. It still is a big problem in society, but it was much worse back then. Especially, I've seen some of that stuff with my own eyes.
Separate. We have to make sure that we have a dominant culture in our country, and
what do you want that culture to be, though? That's the question that no one can seem to answer.
People who move here want to help make the UK a better place.
How do you define better? Because your conservative values, do not work. We've seen that in practice, both socially, with Cameron's idea of big society, that failed. In terms of economically, it's failed. So what kind of values do you want people to have? Do you want people to have the I'm all right Jack mentality of, if I'm okay and my family's okay, I don't care about anyone else? Because that's in my opinion, part of at least English culture to an extent. And if we follow that kind of mentality, then none of the big issues will get resolved, because all people will say is, am I doing okay? Yeah. So why would I care about you?
Country is not a hotel. It's not a dormitory.
With the hotel stuff as well, you guys caused that by not dealing with asylum seekers, processing claims. Like this is garbage, straight garbage. She goes on to talk about, the death penalty and things like that.
And I think that an inquiry, which the Prime Minister has announced, and I do welcome that, should look at that. But I also think we need to look at much more than exactly what the state actors are doing. How we process information, what people believe they are or are not allowed to say, what they should be saying, because I think all of that has an influence. If there are people in a community who see someone like that and don't act or don't say anything because they think they're not supposed to, I think we'll end up seeing...
This guy, the person I talked about, the one who did the murders in Stockport, Southport, sorry, I keep saying Stockport. He was found with knives, and so it was reported to the police. Like, the police found out about this, and they let him go. So it's not a case of society failing, the general public failing here. It's a question of the police failing, the court system's failing, the politicians failing. Because if you wanted to resolve this, you would say, look, if you're caught with a knife, 5-year mandatory prison sentence. If you're caught with a weapon like that, which is blatantly for attacking others, a zombie killer, they call the type of blades, I think it's a machete, ZKs. If you're caught with one of those, mandatory minimum 5 years in prison, straight. That's one of the ways you resolve this kind of stuff. If you actually had the prison space, you could do that. But we don't. This is not a failure of the general public, in my opinion. This is a failure of politicians like her.
Many more people slip through the cracks. We need society as well as the state bodies to get involved.
Does that suggest that you agree with the letter that's gone, I think, from 2 cabinet ministers today, essentially suggesting that social media platforms should be playing a bigger role here, perhaps in censoring or policing material that people can see?
I think you're referring to the letter, I believe, Yvette Cooper wrote. So these are things that we've been saying for a long time.
So why didn't you do anything then? When you're in power, no one cares what you have to say. People care what you do. That's one of the things I think politicians fail to understand. Like, you were in charge. You were meant to do something about this. If you thought it was a big deal, you evidently failed. You sit outside now and you let someone else try and deal with the mess. You don't get a say anymore.
Sometimes I believe that they can be a distraction, that social media should do more. Of course it should do. We've put in legislation for that we should ban the sale of knives. We've put in multiple laws banning all sorts of different knives. But those things will only ever go so far. We need to look at the root of where these behaviours come from, whether it is extremist ideology of whatever flavour, whether it's religious or related to hate of a particular group or sex. We need to start looking more at how we bring more people into society, integrate them across a whole range of issues.
All right, on Rida Kubana himself, should there have been a longer sentence available to the judge?
I do believe that there should have been. I think that the fact that if he had done this 10 days later, he would have been eligible for a whole life sentence is something that we should look at.
Which, again, you guys had 14 years. If you were concerned about sentencing guidelines, that's something I think the government said. So again, if you guys wanted to deal with this and be tough on crime, like you guys keep pretending to be, you would have dealt with this over the 14 years you guys actually had.
In those areas, I think that we could see some judicial discretion. But he has a very long sentence, 52 years. What I want to make sure is that victims don't have to see their perpetrators after such serious and heinous crimes. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that people should be put in prison for life. And it's unfortunate.
If you genuinely believe that, you should have made it so the prisons weren't completely packed out. Because now we're in a situation where more violent criminals are being let out. And I don't blame Labour for that. I blame the Tories for that, because there's no jail capacity. So you have a situation where people who are victims of SA and worse crimes, their perpetrators are being let out of the prisons early, because of the fact there's no prison space for new inmates. That's the system that you guys created because of austerity. So we should have an open and honest conversation around that as well, which is something, is that one of the British values that Badenoch is about, packing out the prisons to the point where they're completely full and can't take on more inmates? Is that, do you want to discuss that as a British value? Absolutely crumble social services and the absolute basics of a society to the point where it can't function, and then turn around and blame them because you've crippled them. Is that a British value? A lack of ownership, I guess. This person here was the absolute wrong choice for the Conservative Party to pick, and it's going to haunt them. It's going to haunt them, I think. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think about Badenoch and British values. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.